All right, we are back on one of my favorite Spiritborn builds this season. If you are looking to play poison builds, this is super fun, it is super fast, and it hits very, very hard. Surprised me, and I haven't even finished maximizing the damage yet. What we're running here is a stinger-based build. Yes, we are stacking some resolve, we're stacking some resilience, we're stacking life, and we're stacking barrier. Then we're inserting our stinger into this, and it is AoE damage, and it's fast, and it is fun. Now, we just did a video on this, but we did get some upgrades here, and that is why I want to make another video, because we are going to be inserting the Shroud of False Death. We'll get to exactly why this is so incredibly strong and so overpowered once we get to the gear portion of this, but just know that this does a ton for this build. It's going to make you faster, hit harder, and it's going to make you even more tanky than we already were before. If you do not have the Shroud of False Death, check out the link in the video description below. There is a completely uber unique version of this that still runs real fast, hits for trillions, and is a ton of fun to play. Since we're adding more uniques to this build, in order to get this to run correctly, you're going to need the Shroud of False Death, the Helmet of Ebawaka, a Banished Lord's Talisman, the Midnight Sun, and then you're also going to need the Rod of Kepaleka. Those are going to be the first base requirements for this build. It is an overpowered build, so we need to be running at least 240 max vigor. Now, that is working off of a bug. So if you don't want to do that, you're going to need a Rod of Kepaleka with at least GA for maximum resources, and you're going to need to put more than just a single master working into it. You're going to have to re-roll to get yourself over that threshold. There are a lot of other builds out there, so I'm going to probably have to do another guide for this that is going to run things like maximum resources on your helmet that'll help get you there. But that is completely separate. That runs on different aspects and completely different wavelength. So look. Now, before we hop into the skills, to make sure that this isn't quite as confusing, and I'll talk about that when we get to the gear later on, we're going to take off the Shroud of False Death. Now we're going to do our skill tree here. We're going to refund all, and we're going to come right up to the top here. We're going to do 2 points into the top here so we can unlock our next section. Stinger actually has a very, very high base damage, and as we go down into Rampant Stinger, this gets even stronger. Stinger is going to do 40% increased damage to single enemies now. Instead of echoing to the surrounding poisoned enemies, Stinger now draws from each to hit enemies in the primary area again for an additional 10% of its base damage, and that happens up to 5 times. So the more you hit in the same area, the more damage it does, and you're going to see it as we build up those stacks. It does more and more damage. That's why moving fast makes this build even better. As we go through, we're going to do 3 points into follow through. This is going to give us 6% increased basic skill damage, and Stinger will be a basic skill and a core skill. It's also going to give us 12% damage on our third cast, but our third cast is going to happen all the time. We're going to go 1 point into Vigorous, and then we're going to go 3 points into Balance Exertion. This is going to give us up to 15% increased damage for our core skills. Our core skills will cost 0 vigor, so we don't have to worry about the increased cost here. We're going to go 1 point into Vortex, and this is going to give us a little bit of pull in. And then when we pull our monsters in close to us, we're also going to knock them down, and then that will keep them in place when we use our Fear. We'll get to the Fear later. We're going to do 1 point into Mirage, and then we're going to do 2 points into Unrestrained. You're going to deal 8% increased damage while unstoppable, and we should be unstoppable pretty much all the time. We're going to do 1 point into Focal Point, and then 3 points into Apex. This is going to give us 9% increased damage to vulnerable enemies, and we're going to double that against elites. We're going to do 1 point into Ravager. We're going to go all the way down through Measured Ravager. Now, Ravager is a incarnate skill. Now, what that means is that all of the incarnate skills, you're going to have a passive and an active ability. The passive ability is going to give us 2 ferocity at minimum. That's all the time, no matter what, we have 2 stacks of ferocity. And when we use Ravager, that's when we're going to get the rest of the bonuses. The most important part about Ravager is that our core skills are going to instantly dash around. So if you watch the run, you just bounce around all over the place, which is what helps us move so fast with this build. And then we're also going to get 30% increased vigor generation. Coming down, we're going to go 1 point into Endurance, and then we're going to go 1 point into Preservance. This is going to give us just a little bit of extra damage reduction here. We're going to go 1 point into Armored Hide, and we're going to go all the way down through Reinforced Armored Hide. Armored Hide is another incarnate skill. Passively, we're going to get 1 resolve every 5 seconds. When we activate this, we're going to get full stacks of resolve, and then it's also going to give us 20% increased damage reduction based on a number of enemies around us. We're going to go down into Counterattack. This is going to be our third incarnate skill. What we're going to get passively, gain 10% dodge chance and automatically retaliate against close enemies. This is going to be against direct attacks. When we activate this, which this will actually not be on our bar, so we're never going to activate this. What we will get from it, though, is passively increase our critical strike damage by up to 30%. The closer we are to more enemies, the more critical strike damage goes, and it scales up very, very high. We're going to do 1 point into Scourge, and we're going to go all the way down through Reinforced Scourge. This will give us 60% of our maximum vigor over 6 seconds. What Scourge does, Scourge fears, and then it slows, and then it also gives us up to a 50x multiplier against crowd-controlled enemies. That is huge. If your vigor generation is more than enough and you don't need to worry about it, you can always take Reinforced Scourge out and go right into Adaptable Scourge. This is going to give you lifesteal, which is an insane amount of healing all the time because we hit so hard so fast that you will have that 4,500 life back constantly. But for now, I'm going to leave it right here for the extra regen. Moving down, life is incredibly important to us. It's going to be a huge multiplier for our damage and survivability. So we're going to do 3 points into Resilient. Casting a Gorilla skill is going to give us 15% increased maximum life for 10 seconds. I have gear on that increases it, but it's 5% per. So if you don't have any increased Resilient, this is what you're going to get. You're going to get 15%. We're going to go 3 points into Dominant. Your Gorilla skills are going to deal 15% increased damage to knock down enemies. And their first hits have a 5% chance to execute anything that is a non-boss. Sometimes things just disappear. You touch them and they're gone. We're going to get knockdown from Soar. We're also going to get knockdown from our Paragon Board, but we'll get to that later. We're going to go 3 points into Potent. Hitting an enemy with a Jaguar skills increases the damage they take from you by up to 30%. We're going to go 3 points into Furnace. Your skills are going to deal 1.5% increased critical strike damage per stack of ferocity, and we're going to stack as many as we can. We're going to go 3 points into Ravenous. Your Centipede skills are going to deal 7.5% increased damage, and that's going to double versus healthy enemies. You're going to get 3 points into Oppressive. Your Centipede skills are going to get 12% increased damage to crowd control enemies, and you're going to get 30% increased crowd control duration. We're going to go 3 points into Resolution. Casting an ultimate skill grants 15% increased damage to elites for 3 seconds. You're going to double that bonus if you're fighting one enemy. You're going to get 3 points into spiritual attunement. Your max vigor is increased by 30 while you have an ultimate skill equipped. We're going to do 3 points into supremacy. Any enemy you kill while an ultimate skill is active grants you a stack of supremacy. This is going to increase your damage by up to 30%. When the ultimate skill ends, you're going to gain 5 stacks of supremacy, but you're going to lose 1 every second. We're going to go into the hunter for our ultimate skill here. When you look at the hunter, what this is going to do is you're going to overfill ferocity by 4 stacks. That means that all of this extra damage that we're getting from ferocity is going to be increased because we're going to be getting our more stacks than we normally would have. We're going to get 100% increased damage to injured enemies. Injured enemies are anything below 35% life. And for our key passive, we're going to be taking Prodigy's Tempo. Now, I have heard a lot of people say that they like using Noxious Resonance here. When we get to the gameplay section, I'll show you exactly what that looks like, because it does not do nearly the damage that you're going to see coming out of Prodigy's Tempo and being able to reset your cooldowns. What Prodigy's Tempo does, every 3rd consecutive cast of the same basic skill, all of your purchased skills are going to be increased by 2 ranks. You're also going to get every 3rd consecutive cast of the same core skill, reduces your active skills cooldown by 10%. So that's going to be increased by 2% for each of their skill ranks. We are going to see massive amounts of cooldown when you use this key passive. Now, I will show you the demo later on when we get to it, but this is going to be the one that's going to put the most damage out. It's going to keep you moving very quickly because you keep all of your skills cooled down. For the Paragon board, when you're putting together Paragon boards this season, make sure that if you're following along on Build Guide, you find one that does not have a fully maxed out board. If it does have a fully maxed out board, take the shortest path to unlock every single glyph and every single legendary node across the entire board first. Do not just start filling out every single node and every single direction that people go, because if you don't have the same amount of Paragon points, you will run out of points by the time you get to the 4th board, maybe even the 3rd board. So make sure that you get your glyphs and your legendary nodes active first, then build out. For the first board here, we're going to be running Colossal. This is going to be incredibly important because we're going to be stacking some Resolve with this build. The way that this build is set up, we are not stacking a massive amount of Resolve, but this definitely is going to help because we're going to get 2% increased damage per each stack of Resolve. Every glyph now, when you hit level 46, is going to get a legendary power on the bottom. That legendary power is in the orange, and glyphs will become legendary. It's all going to be multiplicative damage. So this is incredibly important to get all of your glyphs to level 46. We're going to deal increased multiplicative damage to close enemies here. Moving up, we're going to be going into the Viscous Shield board. You're going to deal 1% increased damage for each 3% of your maximum life that you have as a barrier. However, this is currently not working as intended. The more life that you get and the more barrier you get, the more damage it does. It does not cap out at the 33.3 that it should be capping out at. Inside of this board, we're going to be running Spirit. Now, you saw all of the ways already that we were multiplying our critical strike damage. There were a couple different ways. So this is going to give us a huge source of critical strike damage that we can multiply through everything. It also is going to give us critical strikes, increase the damage enemies take from you by up to 15%. Then we're also going to get an increased multiplicative damage to elite enemies. We're going to be going up into the Sapping board. When you cast 3 Gorilla, Jaguar, Eagle, or Centipede skills with the same spirit in a row, you're going to restore 15% of your vigor, and you're going to deal 30% increased damage over 5 seconds. Inside of that board, we're going to be running Hubris. You can ignore the Thorns part here. What we're really using this for is the 327% bonus to your magic nodes. Inside of the board, we have all of our maximum resources. So this is going to help give us a ton of additional maximum resources. And with the Kebeleka, that is all going to get multiplied by a huge number. The next board that we're going to be running is Convergence. You deal bonus damage equal to 20% of your 2 highest bonus damage types combined, up to 30% total. Inside of that board, we're going to be using Fester. This is going to give us 15% increased damage to crowd control enemies with our Centipede skills. We're also going to get a multiplicative damage to poison. For the final board, we're going to come all the way over to Revealing. Up to a 30% chance to knock down vulnerable enemies. You're also going to deal 30% increased damage to crowd control enemies. We put this board last because the way that this works out, and this is something that I'll be looking at in the future, is that the only thing that we do not have active for a rare node is going to be this one node. We have everything else that's active. So if we mess around with the board a little bit, and I'll post a little update to the videos if I need to, and to the Paragon board in the planner, which is going to be in the description of this video, so make sure you follow along with the planner. Inside of this board here, we're going to be running Canny. I went back and forth with Canny and Bane and Canny and Bane, and I tried so many different times. So if you feel that you're getting more damage out of Bane, put Bane in. If you feel like you're getting more damage out of Canny, you can put Canny in. I have heard that this is not working as intended with Convergence, but I haven't seen anywhere anything solid about it. So I'm running with Canny because I saw increase in numbers when I was hitting the target dummies. What this is going to do, it's going to give us 10% increased non-physical damage, and we're also going to get a legendary bonus of non-physical damage. So that's the Paragon board. Now we're going to hop into the gear, starting at the top. We're going to be starting with the Harmony of Ebawaka. This is going to be a massive increase in damage because we get up to 30% increased damage per spirit type that we have on our weapon. So our skills are actually going to be Centipede, Jaguar, and Gorilla skill. The way that this reads is that according to your secondary spirit hull choice, your skills are all additionally Eagle, Jaguar, Gorilla, or Centipede. Now, I'll explain how that works later when we get to the spirit hull portion of it, but this is a really big source of damage because 90% anywhere is huge. So now let's get into the meat and potatoes of this. We're going to be talking about the Shroud of False Death. At face value, this does not look that impressive. You have all stats, you have max life, you have an additive damage number that's really big, but you only get that when you enter stealth, and the amount of times that you enter stealth is not very high versus a run. The resource generation is great because it's going to help with this build, and then if you haven't been damaged when you gain that stealth, you really don't gain stealth very often. The most important part about this, and the biggest reason that we're using this, right underneath where it says armor, if you see it says +1 to all passives. When we go into our skill tree and you look at this, we now have every single node with a blue number on it. That blue number indicates that we've increased it with our armor. So item contribution is now 1. Now we have unlocked every single passive. We have now gained 5% damage reduction here. We now have additional 1% damage reduction here. We have gained defensive skills grant you vigor. So we have now gained all of the barrier generation that we didn't take in this build, because in the last build, because we weren't running the Shroud of False Death, we actually had to put skill points into these two so that we had a barrier when we started the dungeon. Now we don't need to do that because Shroud of False Death gives us all of the passives. So we're going to take advantage of every single thing that we have now. So it is incredibly strong. That is a ton of extra multipliers, a ton of extra damage reduction. Every single one of the passives is now unlocked. So hopping back down, we're going to go into the gloves here. We're going to be running Moonrise. Damaging an enemy with a basic skill is going to grant you 4% increased attack speed. That's going to stack 5 times. When you hit 5 stacks, you're going to enter a Vampiric Blood Rage. That's going to give you 80% increased basic skill damage, and then you're going to get 5% movement speed. For the affixes, we're going to be running max life, attack speed, critical strike damage. And then for your tempers, we're going to be running critical strike damage. And because we're running the Kepaleka, we have room to add vortex size on here. We're going to add vortex size onto this. Now, I went back and forth on this because vortex size is more quality of life. If you want to hit the breakpoint for your barrier bonus, it needs to be at 123. So if you put your barrier bonus onto your gloves, you're going to hit that breakpoint. I haven't felt like I needed it yet, but if I want to start pushing the pits, that is a change that I would make. I would add on the additional barrier bonus here and take off the vortex size. For the pants, we're going to be running Interdiction. You're going to get 10% block chance per stack of resolve. So if we look right here, our stacks of resolve, we're going to be running 10. So if we look at our block chance here, we're going to be running 100% block chance at all times as long as we have those stacks of resolve. Our stacks of resolve are going to get refilled by our armor hide, as we constantly spam armored hide, so we should have 100% block chance all of the time. So what does block chance do? Block chance does not mean that we are going to block all of the incoming damage all at one time. What it does mean, if you look over at the block chance here, it's going to tell you that we're going to reduce the damage when we block a direct attack by 24%. So that means that anytime something hits us, we can block it, and we take 24% less damage from that. For the affixes, we're going to be running Dexterity, Max Life, Basic Skills. And for the tempers, we're going to be running Barrier Generation and Resilient. Resilient is where we get the rest of our life from. As you can see, my masterworking is all over the place. I have single GAs on everything, and those GAs should be max life. As you're building this character, work on finding max life GAs. I will have all of the optimal setup for where your masterworking crits need to go in the planner, so make sure you're following along there. For the boots, we're going to be running Duelist. Maximum ferocity is increased by 5. So we're going to get additional damage from ferocity and additional attack speed. So now that's going to get increased by 5. When we use the hunter, we're going to overfill that by 4. So now we're at 9 plus the 2 earlier. So now we're at 11, and it just keeps on stacking up and up and up, depending on the skills that you put on. So what ferocity does, it gives us 5% increased attack speed per stack. For the affixes here, we're going to be running max life, armor, and movement speed. And then for the tempers, we're going to be running barrier generation and then movement speed as well. For your weapon, we're going to be running the Rod of Kapaleka. Now, this right here probably should have been a mythic unique. It is so strong and so crazy. I'm expecting to see some changes at some point to this. Your core skills are now additionally basic skills, and they're free to cast. So if you look right here, Stinger now costs 0, and it's a core skill, so it doesn't cost a single thing whatsoever. You're going to deal 30% reduced damage based on the Vigor cost, but that's okay because when we get to maximum Vigor, our core skills are going to consume all of the Vigors, and it's going to return to full damage. It's going to cast at its largest size, so we don't need to run increased size on the gloves. That was something I had in the last video that we're going to be changing to this one, because as soon as I posted the video, some people mentioned that the Kapaleka increased the size, completely missed it, so thank you everybody for that contribution, and thank you for correcting me. And then the most important part about this, they become a guaranteed critical strike. When they critically hit, they're going to increase the critical strike damage by up to 3% per point of vigor. That is a huge, huge boost to your critical strike damage. So now we just read that Kapaleka is going to spend all of your vigor. It's the only way to get yourself back up to maximum power. So how do we refund and how do we get back our vigor super quickly? Ring of Midnight Sun is the way that we're going to do that. The most important part about this is the aspect. It does not matter the rest of it. Doesn't matter if it's a GA. You can still get 50% increased regeneration at a regular legendary, and that will be more important than anything else on this. And the reason is, when you critically strike, which we always critically strike with the Kapaleka, you're going to regain 50% of the vigor that you have spent in the last 2 seconds. We can do several hits per second. If we are spending vigor every single time that we do a hit, then we are going to regen our maximum vigor every single time that we do it, as long as we have enough generation. So this is going to be a huge source of getting it back. When we get to the gameplay loop, watch the vigor bar because it's going to just flash very, very quickly as we come right back to full vigor. For the ring, we're going to be running the redirected force. This is the second half of this aspect right here. So interdiction is directly playing a part in the redirected force. You're going to gain increased critical strike damage equal to 70% of your block chance. We're going to have 100% block chance all the time because we're going to be running interdiction. Blocking doubles the bonus, up to 140% increased critical strike damage. So all of those increased critical strike damage multipliers are now adding up, and we're getting a ton of it. For the affixes, what I ideally would like to run would be attack speed, max life, and then chance to make enemies vulnerable. This is the only way that we're getting our vulnerable damage. So we need to make sure that we have this, even if it's not a GA, we need to re-roll for chance to make enemies vulnerable so you have a source of vulnerable damage going out. Resource generation and critical strike damage will be the tempers. For the amulet, we're going to be running the Banished Lord's Talisman. Maximum life is the most important GA that you can have. Find something with a very high aspect and then the max life GA, because that is going to be a source of survivability and a source of damage. So that's the gear. Now let's look at the gems, the runes, and then your spirit hall. In your gems, you're going to have to figure out how you want to play this. Resistances aren't quite as important when you're running a high life Spiritborn. We do have the option to run Song of the Mountain. This is going to bring me up to 800. Now, as you move through your Paragon board, if you still feel squishy, you can always add things like armor nodes. You can take things out of some damage, add them into armor. Depends on how you want to play this. This is what I have pushed the pits in. Just like this, I speed run through tier 100s. I've been trying to push with this build to see how far we can take it. So making sure that you have Song of the Mountain on is going to be important. You can also run your Elixir of Fortitude here. That's going to give you more max life, so now we're up to 16,000. And then we're going to run our Red and Mine Buzz. That is going to give us an additional set of life. So now with your barrier, I'm running 34,000 life, and I'm refreshing that barrier constantly. So for the gems, you can choose to either get your resistances up or get your armor up or have a mix of both. But feel out your character, see what you need the most. In the armor, we're definitely going to be running Amethyst because we want to have that barrier generation. We need the barrier bonus to be at least 123%. That is going to be the breakpoint between your barrier that we're going to be generating from our runes and then also your barrier generation. So going into the runes, we're going to be running the Pot Q. Spend 300% of your maximum resources, and that's going to invoke the Druid's Earthen Bulwark, and it's going to grant you a barrier. We get the barrier here. We get our barrier generation that's going to give us the additional to get up to 100% barrier. The final set of runes is going to be Tam Zal. This is going to give you 20% additional maximum life here. So we're already sitting at 17,000. When we start to actually attack here, we actually go way up. Once we start popping everything, we're going to get up to 27,000 life. We get a barrier that fills up to 27,000 life. That means that we double our life. We're now sitting at over 50,000 life. And then that barrier refreshes all the time. So that's why this whole build does not necessarily need to run armor cap, and it doesn't necessarily need to run resistance cap because we have so much life and we have so much barrier that it is always being refreshed. And that brings us to the Spirit Hall. So we go into our Spirit Hall, we're going to be running Jaguar and we're going to be running Gorilla. This is going to be a massive source of damage. Every single huge number that you see the Spiritborn hitting is because of this skill right here. Every 15th a time that you deal direct damage to an enemy with a Jaguar skill, unleash an additional strike dealing 15% of the damage that you have dealt to them within the last 0.5 seconds. This is scaling through the roof. That is where all of the white damage numbers are coming from that you see with this build. Additionally, this makes all of your skills Jaguar skills. For the second one, we're running Gorilla because of the Helm of Ebawaka. Not only that, but when we have 5 stacks of Resolve, we're going to be unstoppable. If you see the chains above my head, that means that I'm unstoppable. I'm unstoppable all the time as long as I maintain those stacks. It stays up pretty much all the time, but it's also going to increase our maximum resolve by 2. When you look at the Helm of Ebawaka, it takes your secondary choice, which is going to be our Gorilla skills, and now that is the reason that we have a Centipede, Jaguar, and a Gorilla skill here. For the gameplay loop, what we're going to be doing so that you guys can see what this does, we get the most damage against elite and bosses. We're going to put elite enemies on. We're going to go to multiple training dummies. We're going to set them to attack so that we activate all of the things that are attacking us versus also hitting things. So we're going to put attack on. And then as we attack, you're going to watch the vigor bar here. So as you watch vigor and we get this going, you just see it flashing. That's because we are returning to 100% vigor all of the time. So this build hits real hard. We just saw 1.4 trillion, 1.5 trillion. That is just base, and I haven't even started scaling anything yet. So we talked about the key passives a little bit. So we're going to swap. We saw 1.5 trillion there, and we just got started. We didn't even spend a whole lot of time attacking. We're going to swap out of that into Noxious Resonance. So this way you can see what this does. We're going to get up to a 1,220% increased damage bonus here. Now, when we start attacking here, if you look at our cooldowns don't come up very often. We are seeing some pretty big numbers, but the cooldowns don't come up, and then the numbers fall off as soon as all of the cooldowns run off. So unfortunately, with this setup, this is just not the setup that we're going to be running because we don't have all of the skills active. Whoops. We won't be able to maintain stacks of Armored Hide. We won't be able to pull in constantly. We won't be able to keep up the damage modifier on Scourge. So it does hit relatively hard. You saw that, almost 1 trillion damage out of that. But we don't have the ability to reset all of our cooldowns when we're not running that key passive. So as we go through this, if you watch the cooldowns on the bottom, we only drop down to 8 stacks of maximum resolve. As you get attacked, you lose stacks of maximum resolve. So our resolve is constantly staying at maximum. We are always going to be staying at maximum of ferocity here too, because we were going to be able to cast the hunter so often. It does need to run this for this particular variant. I'm sure that there are some out there that are going to run Noxious Resonance, but this build is super fun. It is very fast. I'm always looking to add to it, make changes. So let me know in the comments what you have been doing, because like I said before, someone corrected me and I immediately made the adjustments, and that came to this here. So thank you guys for watching so much. I'm live on YouTube and Twitch every night. Stop by, say hi, theorycraft with me. Catch you on the clip side.